Chapter 1. Introduction. The Fascination of the Pyramids. For thousands of years, the Pyramids of Giza have exerted an almost unbroken fascination on people from all over the world. They rise majestically above the Nile Valley, embedded in the desert on the edge of today's Cairo, and are still considered visible witnesses of a high culture whose achievements in architecture, organization, and symbolism still cause amazement to this day. Hardly any other building of antiquity has produced as many myths, legends, and scientific research as these enormous monuments. The pyramids are unique in many ways. They are the oldest surviving buildings in the world to be included in the canon of the seven wonders of the ancient world, and at the same time the only one of these wonders of the world that has survived time almost unscathed. While temples, statues, and palaces of other cultures have long since crumbled or been destroyed, the Pyramids of Giza still stand proudly in the desert, despite millennia of sandstorms, earthquakes, and human influences. Their mere continued existence makes them a monument to permanence. The fascination they exert is not only due to their size, although it is overwhelming. The Great Pyramid of Cheops, the largest of the three pyramids, was originally almost 147 meters high and thus the tallest structure in the world for thousands of years. Limestone blocks weighing millions of tons were stacked on top of each other so precisely that the fits are still almost perfect today. But it is not only the technical performance that amazes us, but also the question of why. Why did a society invest such enormous resources in the construction of monuments that served as tombs for its rulers? The answer takes us deep into the worldview of ancient Egypt. The pyramids were much more than burial grounds. They were symbols of the divine power of the pharaoh, images of the mythical Primeval hill on which creation began, and at the same time huge machines for the afterlife. Within them, the pharaohs were to embark on the journey to the realm of the dead as divine rulers, united with the sun god Re, in order to ensure the eternal cycle of death and rebirth from there. The pyramids were thus visible manifestations of the belief in immortality, expressed in stone. But the pyramids are fascinating not only as religious symbols, but also as testimonies to human organization and technology. The construction of such monuments required a logistical masterpiece. Thousands of workers had to be coordinated, quarries operated, transport routes organized, food secured, and precise architectural plans implemented. Modern archaeologists have shown that the pyramids were not created by slave labor, as long assumed, but by an organized workforce that lived in specially built settlements and benefited from the supply of the rich Nile Valley. In this way, the pyramids also become a reflection of the social and economic organization of ancient Egypt. Since ancient times, the pyramids have captured people's imaginations. Even the Greeks stood in awe of them and declared them the wonder of the world. Herodotus, the father of historiography, reported on its construction in the 5th century BC, although, as is so often the case, his descriptions mixed legends and reality. Later, the Romans saw in them symbols of an ancient wisdom that they tried to surpass but never achieved. In the Middle Ages, on the other hand, numerous myths were entwined around the pyramids. They were thought to be granaries of Joseph from the Bible, treasure chambers full of gold, or magical buildings created by supernatural forces. With the modern era and the beginning of science, the view changed. European travelers and scholars began to systematically study the pyramids. Napoleon Bonaparte brought with him a whole host of scientists during his Egyptian campaign at the end of the 18th century, who measured, drew, and analyzed the monuments. From this point on, the study of the pyramids became a central field of Egyptology. Modern methods such as laser scans, drone images, and infrared investigations have revealed new secrets to this day, such as hidden cavities or construction details that expand our picture of construction methods. But despite all these scientific advances, part of the mystery remains. We know a lot about the organization of the construction, about the religious significance, about the rulers who had it built. And yet there is something mysterious about the pyramids that even the most modern investigations cannot remove. It is the interplay of enormous dimensions, simple form, and cosmic symbolism that makes these buildings seem timeless. Today, the Pyramids of Giza are not only an object of research, but also a global cultural heritage. Every year, millions of tourists flock to Egypt to marvel at them. They are under the protection of UNESCO and are considered one of the most recognizable landmarks of mankind. At the same time, they are threatened by environmental influences, tourism, and the growing expansion of the modern metropolis of Cairo, which is growing closer and closer to the necropolis. The pyramids are therefore not only relics of a distant past, but also current memorials for dealing with cultural heritage. They challenge us to preserve and respect humanity's legacy, and they show that greatness and permanence lie not only in power and domination, but in the ability to fascinate generations over millennia. This makes the Pyramids of Giza much more than just tombs. They are symbols of man's quest for immortality, of his ability to create great things, and of the power of ideas that extend beyond death. They combine history, myth, and the present, an interplay that keeps their fascination unbroken even after more than 4,500 years. To understand the significance of the Pyramids of Giza, it is necessary to take a look at the era in which they were created. The pyramids belong to the time of the Old Kingdom, an era that lasted from about 2700 to 2200 BC and is often referred to as the Age of the Pyramids. It was the first great heyday of the Egyptian state, in which a highly developed administration, a stable economy, and a strict religious political order had developed. This combination made it possible to create structures of a dimension that were previously unimaginable. At the center of this society was the pharaoh. He was not only king and supreme ruler, but also a divine being. In the Egyptian worldview, the pharaoh was the son of the sun god Re and thus a kind of link between humans and the gods. His task was to uphold the Ma'at, the cosmic order of justice, harmony, and balance. Everything that happened in the state was considered an expression of this divine will, which the pharaoh embodied. Thus, the pharaoh was not just a political leader, but a living deity. When he died, he began the transition to the world of the gods and finally united with Re to accompany the course of the sun for eternity. This belief made it necessary to build massive tombs that would not only preserve the pharaoh's body, but also secure his divine power in the afterlife. The pyramids are thus not only architectural masterpieces, but also an expression of a religious worldview that made the ruler immortal beyond death. The Old Kingdom was characterized by an efficient administration. Egypt was a centralized state in which civil servants, clerks, and administrators were responsible for collecting taxes, organizing workers, and managing major projects. Agriculture on the Nile provided surpluses that made it possible to build monuments. Regular floods ensured fertile fields, and a sophisticated irrigation system ensured the supply of grain. This economic stability was the basis for the huge construction projects. Social structures also played a decisive role. Although Egyptian society was strictly hierarchical, the pyramid buildings show that it was not only slave labor that made it possible. Modern excavations show that the workers who worked on the pyramids lived in specially built settlements, were fed and provided with medical care. They were organized workers who were recruited for construction on a seasonal basis, for example during the Nile flood, when the fields were uncultivated. In this way, religious mission was combined with economic logic. The construction of the pyramids was part of a system that offered people work, food, and a place in the divine order. Religion also had a profound influence on the Old Kingdom. The Egyptians believed in an afterlife in which the soul of the deceased, the so-called Ka soul, continued to exist. For this to be possible, the body had to be preserved. Therefore, the art of mummification was developed and burial chambers were built to provide protection from looters and destruction. In this sense, the pyramids were huge machines of immortality. They served to preserve the pharaoh's physical and mental existence for eternity. The Old Kingdom produced a number of rulers known for their monumental buildings. The Fourth Dynasty, ca. 2620 to 2500 BC, in particular is considered the heyday. The pharaohs Snofru, Cheops, Chephren, and Mykerinos ruled here. whose pyramids in Giza and Dasha still stand today. Cheops had the largest of the pyramids built, the Great Pyramid, and thus a structure that would remain the tallest in the world for thousands of years. Khafre followed him with a slightly smaller pyramid, made famous by the Sphinx, while Menkaure had the smallest of the three Great Pyramids of Giza built. The era in which the pyramids were created thus shows the perfect combination of religious faith, political power, and economic strength. Only in such a constellation was it possible to erect monuments of this dimension. The Pyramids of Giza did not come into being by chance, but were the expression of a society that saw itself in harmony with its environment and in firm conviction of its religious order. In retrospect, it can be said that the Old Kingdom was the foundation on which Egyptian culture was built in the millennia to come. It laid the foundations for art, architecture, religion, and administration, which continued to have an impact for a long time. The pyramids are thus not only monuments to individual rulers, but the built symbol of an entire epoch, a time in which Egypt saw itself as the center of the world and its kings as gods who had to be captured in stone for eternity. The Pyramids of Giza do not stand isolated in the desert, but are part of an entire necropolis, a huge realm of the dead that was built for the pharaohs and their followers. The choice of location was not accidental, but the result of careful consideration that combined geographical, religious, and symbolic factors. The necropolis of Giza embodies the Egyptian understanding of death, the afterlife, and the cosmic order fixed in the stone for eternity. Giza is located on the western edge of the Nile Valley, not far from today's Cairo. The location alone has a deep symbolic meaning. For the Egyptians, the Nile was the lifeline that determined everything: agriculture, economy, transport, and culture. Its course from south to north reflected the order of the world, and its regular floods were considered a divine gift. However, it was not the river itself that was decisive for the burial of the dead, but its two banks. The eastern shore, where the sun rises, was considered the realm of the living. The western shore, where the sun sets, was the realm of the dead. For this reason, the great necropolises of Egypt were always built on the west bank, including that of Giza. The geographical conditions also played an important role. The Giza Plateau offers solid limestone subsoil that is stable enough to support structures of gigantic weight. The proximity to the Nile facilitated the transport of building materials brought from quarries in Tura and Aswan. The blocks, which weighed several tons, could be brought close to the construction site by boats and transported there via ramp systems. The choice of Giza was therefore also a logistical decision that combined the possibilities of nature with the visions of the rulers. The necropolis of Giza encompasses much more than just the three great pyramids of Cheops, Khafre, and Menkaure. Around it stretches a vast area with temples, smaller pyramids, tombs of members of the royal family, officials, and priests, as well as the famous Sphinx. Each building had its place and function in a strictly thought-out overall system. The pyramids were the monumental tombs of the pharaohs. The mortuary temples at their foot were used for the cult of the dead and the ritual acts that were supposed to support the pharaoh in the afterlife. From there, processional routes led to valley temples on the edge of the Nile, which in turn were part of the burial rituals. The complex was therefore not a loose juxtaposition, but a sacred space in which religion, politics, and architecture were united. Every visitor who entered the necropolis was confronted with the greatness and power of the pharaoh. The pyramids rose into the sky as visible signs of divine order, while the surrounding tombs and temples underlined the cosmic harmony. For the people of that time, Giza was not a place of death in the modern sense, but a gateway to eternity, an area where heaven and earth touched. The orientation of the pyramids is also characterized by deep symbolism. They are oriented exactly according to the cardinal directions, which indicates the highly developed knowledge of the Egyptians in astronomy and geometry. The sides of the Great Pyramid of Cheops, for example, deviate from the north-south axis by only a few arc minutes, a precision that is impressive even with modern means. This orientation had not only practical reasons, but also religious ones. It connected the buildings with the movements of the sun and the stars. In particular, the connection to the stars of Orion's belt, which were associated with the god Osiris in Egyptian belief, has been repeatedly emphasized in research. Numerous mastabas were also built around the pyramids, rectangular tombs for members of the royal family, high officials, and priests. This shows that the necropolis was not just a place for the pharaoh, but a whole network of burials that included the elite of the empire. Those who were buried near the divine ruler symbolically benefited from his power and his proximity to the gods. The necropolis of Giza is therefore much more than a collection of tombs. It is an expression of an entire culture that understood death not as an end, but as a transition. The architecture, the location, and the symbolism merge into a message that has an effect over thousands of years. That human life is part of a divine order that can be made visible in stone and geometry. Today, Giza is one of the world's best-known archaeological sites, a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and a magnet for millions of visitors. But despite all the tourist attention, the necropolis remains a sacred place. Their monumental buildings manifest a worldview that merged life, death, and eternity into a unity. Anyone standing in front of the pyramids today is not only looking at stones, but at a worldview carved in stone, a legacy that has survived the millennia. The pyramid is part of an entire complex that was built for the death cult of the pharaoh. In addition to the actual pyramid, there is a valley temple on the edge of the Nile, a walkway that led to the mortuary temple at the base of the pyramid, as well as smaller side pyramids for queens and mastabas for high dignitaries. This ensemble made the pyramid a center of religious rituals that were to accompany the king in the afterlife. The internal structure of the Pyramid of Cheops is as fascinating as its external appearance. For a long time, it was assumed that it consisted of only a single burial chamber deep inside. But modern research shows that it contains a complex system of rooms and corridors. The most famous are the King's Chamber, the Queen's Chamber, and the Great Gallery. The King's Chamber is located in the heart of the pyramid, with an empty sarcophagus made of rose granite. Above it are several relief chambers that were supposed to dissipate the weight of the stone masses above, proof of the sophistication of the builders. The so-called Queen's Chamber, whose function is still disputed today, is located further down in the building. Some researchers suspect that it was originally intended as a burial chamber. Others see it as a symbolic space. The Great Gallery, on the other hand, is a monumental corridor over 8 meters high, which impressively shows the engineering skills of the Egyptians. The walls are layered so precisely that the load is evenly distributed and the passage has remained stable to this day. The corridors and shafts are still puzzling. Narrow ventilation shafts lead from the king's chamber to the outside, the orientation of which is interpreted to certain stars. Some theories say that they were supposed to represent symbolic soul paths for the pharaoh to ascend to the gods. Recent investigations using infrared technology and radiography have discovered further cavities, the function of which has not yet been conclusively clarified. This shows that even after thousands of years, the Pyramid of Cheops has not revealed its secrets. The precision of the construction is particularly remarkable. The sides of the pyramid are aligned almost exactly according to the cardinal directions, with a deviation of less than half a degree. The base has been brought up to a level that has a maximum of 2 centimeters difference in height, although it measures over 230 meters. This accuracy is difficult to achieve even with modern means and testifies to a highly developed understanding of geometry, astronomy, and craftsmanship. The building itself is a topic that has occupied researchers and laymen alike for centuries. How could people erect such a monument over 4,500 years ago, without modern machines? The answer lies in a combination of organization, technology, and sheer human manpower. Ramp systems were probably used to transport the heavy blocks upwards piece by piece. Various hypotheses assume straight ramps, spiral staircases, or combinations of both. The decisive factor was the ability to coordinate hundreds of thousands of workers, to ensure their supply and to sustain a construction period of probably 20 to 30 years. Over the centuries, the Pyramid of Cheops has undergone numerous changes. Its original smooth cladding of light limestone was largely removed in the Middle Ages and used for construction projects in Cairo. Today, only the core of coarse limestone blocks is visible, which gives it its characteristic stepped appearance. Nevertheless, it still gives an impression of its original splendor as its shiny surface reflected the sunlight and it shone like a shining symbol in the desert. The pyramid has attracted visitors and researchers since ancient times. The Greeks admired it as one of the 7 wonders of the world. Herodotus reported on its creation, albeit with legendary embellishments. Later, Roman travelers, Arab scholars, and finally European explorers came to try to decipher their secrets. Each epoch projected its own ideas into the monument, from treasuries full of gold to mathematical and cosmic messages that were supposed to be hidden in their dimensions. Today, the Cheops pyramid is a symbol not only for Egypt, but for all of humanity. It stands for the will to seek the eternal in the transient, for man's ability to create the seemingly impossible, and for the power of faith and organization. Their very existence raises questions about the limits of human possibilities, about the relationship between religion and technology, and about the legacy that a culture can leave behind. The Great Pyramid of Cheops is therefore much more than a tomb. It is a manifesto in stone that embodies the greatness, faith, and visions of an entire era. Their sight, whether from the desert or in the context of the modern metropolis of Cairo, remains overwhelming. Those who stand in front of it look not only into the past, but into the heritage of humanity itself, a legacy that has rested unshakably in the desert sands for over 4,500 years and is likely to outlast many generations to come. The second large pyramid on the Giza Plateau is the Pyramid of the Pharaoh Khafre, son of Cheops and ruler of the 4th dynasty of the Old Kingdom. At first glance, it seems even larger than the famous Pyramid of Khufu, although it is actually a bit smaller. This optical illusion is created by its clever placement on a slightly higher plateau, as well as by the steeper angle of inclination of its flanks. In addition to being an architectural masterpiece, Khafre's pyramid is closely linked to one of the most famous monuments in human history, the Great Sphinx of Giza. Originally, the Pyramid of Khafre was around 143.5 meters high, only a few meters smaller than the Pyramid of Khufu. Today it reaches about 136 meters. Its base measures just under 215 meters, and the angle of inclination is around 53 degrees, giving it a steeper and more imposing appearance. It is particularly noteworthy that at its top part of the original cladding of light Tura limestone is still preserved. This remnant gives an impression of how the pyramids once shone in the sunlight and were visible from afar. As with all royal tombs of the Old Kingdom, the pyramid was part of a larger complex. These included a valley temple on the edge of the Nile, an outway, and a mortuary temple directly at the base of the pyramid. The Valley Temple of Khafre is one of the best preserved of its kind. It was built from huge granite blocks, some of which weigh more than 100 tons. The precise workmanship and the simple monumentality of the building have impressed archaeologists to this day. Inside, there were numerous statues of the pharaoh depicting him as a god-king. The internal structure of the pyramid is less complex than that of the Pyramid of Khufu. It has a descending and an ascending corridor, both of which lead into the burial chamber. This is lined with solid granite blocks, which shows how much emphasis has been placed on stability and durability. The sarcophagus that sits there is simple yet monumental, a symbol of the ruler's power in the afterlife. Particularly closely connected to the Pyramid of Khafre is the Great Sphinx of Giza, which lies directly in front of its valley temple. With its lion body and human head, it is one of the most famous sculptures in the world. Their origin is usually attributed to Khafre, although there are still discussions about it today. Some researchers see the Sphinx as an image of the pharaoh himself. Others interpret it more generally as a guardian figure of the necropolis. What is certain, however, is that its dimensions are unique. Over 73 meters long and 20 meters high, it was carved out of a single limestone rock. The symbolic meaning of the Sphinx is complex. In ancient Egypt, the lion was considered a symbol of strength and royal power, while the human head embodied wisdom and divine rule. In this combination, a being was created that was at the same time protector, symbol of power and connection to the divine world. She was, in a sense, the guardian of the Pyramid of Khafre and the entire necropolis of Giza. From an archaeological point of view, the Pyramid of Khafre is proof of the continuity and at the same time further development of architecture in the Old Kingdom. It shows the same basic principles as the Pyramid of Cheops, but appears more harmonious in its execution. Its complex with temples and sphinx illustrates how much architecture and religion were intertwined. The entire complex was not only a tomb, but a sacred center that confirmed the king in his role as god and guarantor of the Marat. The comparison of the two great pyramids of Cheops and Khafre is particularly exciting. While Cheops focused on pure monumentality, Khafre combined architectural grandeur with an iconic visual language. His pyramid is complemented by the Sphinx, which placed the image of the ruler even more strongly in the religious and cosmic context. This gave the complex an additional dimension. It was not only a burial ground, but also a visible symbol of royal power and divine protection. Over the centuries, the Pyramid of Khafre suffered less from looting and destruction than that of its father. Parts of its limestone cladding have been preserved, and the temple complexes still give an impression of their former splendor. Nevertheless, it did not remain untouched. Earthquakes, sandstorms, and the ravages of time have left their mark. The Sphinx in particular was repeatedly threatened by burial and had to be excavated and restored several times. Today, the Pyramid of Khafre, together with the Pyramid of Cheops and the Pyramid of Mycerinos, is considered the heart of the Giza necropolis. Millions of visitors marvel at it every year, and for many it looks even more impressive because of the Sphinx. It is an example of how Egyptian architecture combined not only size and technology, but also symbolic power. Chapter 6. The Pyramid of Mycerinos, the smallest of the three great buildings. The third great pyramid of the Giza Plateau is the Pyramid of Pharaoh Mykerinos, Greek form of his name, in Egyptian, Menkaure. It is the smallest of the three world-famous monuments, but it is precisely its more modest dimensions that make it a special counterpart to the gigantic structures of its predecessors. While Cheops and Khafre primarily relied on monumental size, Mykerinos created a structure that was smaller, but no less significant, both architecturally and symbolically. Originally, the Mykerinos pyramid measured about 65 meters high with a base length of about 108 meters. Today, it has shrunk to about 62 meters due to the loss of cladding and upper parts. Compared to the enormous dimensions of the pyramids of Cheops and Khafre, it seems almost modest, but its execution testifies to the same precision and architectural standards. Its sides are also strictly aligned with the cardinal directions, and its layout also follows the principle of the pyramid complex with valley temple, ascent, and mortuary temple. A special feature of the Mykerinos pyramid is its cladding. While the two larger pyramids were originally completely covered with limestone from Tura, Mykerinos opted for a partial use of rose granite from Aswan. The lowest 16 stone layers of the pyramid consisted of this hard, reddish rock, which gave the structure a unique appearance. Granite was much more difficult to work with than limestone and had to be transported hundreds of kilometers up the Nile. The fact that it was nevertheless used shows the high symbolic value that was attached to it. Granite was considered particularly noble and durable. The internal structure of the Mykerinos pyramid differs in some points from the structures of its predecessors. The entrance is not in the middle of the north side as in Cheops and Khafre, but slightly offset. A descending corridor leads to an antechamber from which several other rooms open. The actual burial chamber is deep inside and was also lined with granite. A sarcophagus was found there, which was attributed to Mykerinos himself. This sarcophagus was recovered by British archaeologists in the 19th century, but was tragically lost in the Mediterranean Sea when the ship Beatrice sank in 1838. This means that one of the most important artifacts of the pyramid has disappeared irretrievably. As with the other pyramids, the Menkaure pyramid was part of a larger complex. Particularly striking are the three small side pyramids on its south side, which were probably intended for queens or other members of the royal family. These queen pyramids are now in great disrepair, but still give the impression that the pharaoh did not understand his power and his afterlife in isolation, but in connection with his family. The Menkaure pyramid has had to contend with special challenges over the millennia. It was already partially damaged in ancient times. Traditions report that Caliph al-Ma'mun is said to have tried to open the Pyramids of Giza in the 9th century. Later, another ruler, probably in the 12th century, had the Pyramid of Menkaure partially destroyed by trying to dismantle it with fire and tools. Traces of these interventions can still be seen on the north side today. Despite this destruction, the pyramid has survived the times and is still an integral part of the Giza complex today. The Menkaure pyramid may be smaller, but it is precisely in its modesty that it reflects another facet of the Old Kingdom. It shows that greatness lies not only in the height of a building, but also in its symbolic depth and in the art it produces. The triad statues and the use of rose granite make the complex unique and make it clear that Menkaure understood his pyramid not only as a tomb, but as an eternal sign of his connection to the gods. Today, the Menkaure pyramid is an indispensable part of the image of Giza. Those who visit the plateau usually first look at the monumental buildings of Cheops and Khafre, but it is the smaller pyramid that completes and rounds off the ensemble. It reminds us that even in an era marked by monumental thinking, diversity and nuance had their place. The Pyramid of Menkaure is thus a quieter, but no less powerful monument, a symbol of permanence, dignity, and the eternal connection between man and God. Chapter 7. Builders and Pharaohs, Power and Religion. The three pyramids of Giza are not only architectural marvels, but also reflections of the power and religious ideas of their builders. Behind each of these monuments stands a pharaoh, whose reign, personality, and religious beliefs are manifested in the stone. With their pyramids, Cheops, Khafre, and Menkaure not only created burial sites, but also visible signs of divine legitimacy, symbols of immortality, and monuments that were to preserve their names for thousands of years. Cheops, Khufu, the builder of the largest pyramid, ruled around 2580 BC and is considered one of the most powerful rulers of the 4th dynasty. Little is known about his personality, as contemporary sources are rare. Later traditions paint an ambivalent picture. While Egyptian depictions glorified him as a radiant god-king, the Greek historian Herodotus reported thousands of years later of a cruel and tyrannical ruler. Whether these reports are historical truth or propaganda remains unclear. What is certain, however, is that Khufu's pyramid became the largest structure ever built by the Old Kingdom, a sign that he had enormous resources, manpower, and organization. Khafre, his son and successor, built the second Great Pyramid, which appears even more powerful than his father's due to its position and steeper angle. His reign was marked by an attempt to continue and surpass his father's legacy. With the construction of the Sphinx, he gave his pyramid complex an iconic addition that symbolized himself and placed him as a divine guardian over the necropolis. Khafre knew how to manifest power not only in stone, but also in imagery. Finally, Menkaure, Menkaure, the grandson of Cheops, decided on a smaller pyramid. His layout differed from the monumental dimensions of his predecessors, but set new accents in the choice of materials and art. In particular, the use of rose granite and the triad statues depicting it between the goddesses indicate a greater emphasis on religious and symbolic aspects. Perhaps this reflected a deliberate departure from the pure monumentality of his predecessors, or perhaps also changed political or economic conditions. The pyramids were not only an expression of individual rulers, but also part of a dynastic tradition. With each new pyramid, A pharaoh tried to fit into the line of his ancestors and at the same time set his own accents. The construction of a pyramid was therefore always a competition for size, durability, and religious significance. At the same time, the three pyramids symbolized the continuity of a ruling family that based its power on divine legitimacy and made it visible through monumental buildings. The orientation of the pyramids according to the cardinal directions and their connection to certain constellations such as the Orion Belt or the North Star show how much religion, astronomy, and architecture intertwined. After his death, the pharaoh was not only to live on in the underworld, but also to appear in the sky, as a star or as a god who eternally accompanies the course of the sun. In this cosmic symbolism, the deep connection between power and religion that permeates the Pyramids of Giza is revealed. The builders of Giza thus left behind not only buildings, but also embassies. Cheops' pyramid proclaims the absolute power and monumental vision of a ruler who wanted to remain visible for generations to come. Khafre supplemented this message with imagery and symbolism that underlined his divine nature. Finally, Menkaure set an example of dignity and religious depth, which perhaps relied less on mass and more on spiritual significance. This diversity shows how complex the role of the pharaoh was in ancient Egypt. He was not only ruler, but also priest, god, and guarantor of the cosmic order. The pyramids are theology turned into stone, architecture as an instrument of power and religious symbol at the same time. They show that power in ancient Egypt was never just secular, but always rested on a divine basis, and that religion was never just a private matter, but a foundation that permeated the entire state. The construction of the Pyramids of Giza was not only a question of faith and the will of the ruler, but also a logistical masterpiece that still evokes admiration today. Behind the huge masses of stone, which were stacked on top of each other in precise geometry, was a meticulous planning that involved the entire state apparatus of Egypt. From the selection of the construction site to the procurement of materials and the supply of the workers, every detail had to be organized. The pyramids are therefore not only monuments of religious symbolism, but also testimonies to highly developed administration and technical competence. The choice of location was already of central importance. The Giza Plateau was not chosen by chance. It provided solid limestone subsoil that could bear the enormous load of the structures, and at the same time was close to the Nile, over which the building materials were transported. In addition, the location on the west bank of the river corresponded to religious ideas. Here, where the sun set, lay the realm of the dead. This combined practical and symbolic aspects to form a perfect basis for the construction. The transport took place in several stages. First, the blocks were loosened in the quarry with copper tools and roughly processed. Then they were put on sleds that were pulled along specially prepared paths. Recent research shows that the sand in front of the sleds was moistened with water to reduce friction. This meant that even blocks weighing several tons could be moved efficiently. Boats were used to cross the stones on the Nile before they finally reached the construction site. There they were transported upwards via ramp systems, a procedure that has not yet been fully clarified and has inspired numerous theories. The division of labor was strictly hierarchically organized. There were overseers, craftsmen, stonecutters, transport workers, and helpers. Everyone had a clearly defined task. Teams of about 40 workers formed a unit. Several such units were grouped together in groups of hundreds. These in turn were under the command of a foreman who was in direct contact with the royal construction managers. This structure allowed for efficient coordination of several thousand people at the same time. The construction time of a pyramid is estimated to be about 20 to 30 years, an entire generation. This meant that a pharaoh had to start building his tomb shortly after his accession to power. Only in this way was it possible to complete the enormous dimensions before he died. The building was thus also an expression of the planning security and stability of the Old Kingdom. A state that could sustain such a project for decades had to have an enormous internal order. The organization of the pyramid construction had far-reaching effects. It promoted the development of administration, technology, and science. It brought people from different regions together and created a sense of collective identity. The construction was not only an act for the king, but also a national project that shaped the self-image of the entire people. In retrospect, it becomes clear that the Pyramids of Giza were made possible not only by divine visions, but also by meticulous planning and organization. From the quarry to the construction site, from the supply of the workers to the exact measurement, every step was part of a gigantic overall concept. The pyramids are thus not only testimonies of faith, but also monuments of human reason, discipline, and cooperation. Chapter 9. The Workers of Giza, Slaves or Free Workers. Hardly any question about the construction of the Pyramids of Giza has occupied the imagination of people as much as that of the workers who built these gigantic structures. For centuries, the idea persisted that tens of thousands of slaves, whipped by overseers, moved the blocks weighing tons under inhumane conditions. This image shaped not only ancient sources such as Herodotus, but also films and novels of modern times. But archaeological research in recent decades has fundamentally changed this cliché. Today we know that the pyramids were not built by enslaved people, but by a large number of organized workers, some of whom even proudly participated in this project. The slave theses have their origins mainly in ancient reports. Herodotus, the Greek historian of the 5th century BC, wrote that Cheops employed 100,000 men who built the pyramid in forced labor. He reports the harshest conditions and cruel treatment. But Herodotus lived over 2,000 years after the construction of the Great Pyramid of Khufu. His information came from stories that had long since mixed with legends. Modern historians therefore view his figures and descriptions with great skepticism. A decisive turning point came with the archaeological discovery of the workers' villages near the Giza Plateau. Since the 1990s, remains of settlements have been excavated there, which clearly prove that the workers were housed in well-organized housing complexes. Simple but solid houses, dormitories, communal kitchens, bakeries, workshops, and even medical facilities were found. These finds contradict the image of enslaved slaves who lived in makeshift camps. Rather, it was a real city that was built especially for the construction workers. The finds of human skeletons from these settlements also provide revealing information. Many show traces of injuries that had been treated medically, broken bones that were splintered, or signs of illness that prove that they had been treated. This indicates that the workers were not simply consumed and replaced, but that efforts were being made to ensure their well-being. There were doctors who cared for the injured and a care system that ensured that even the sick and weak were cared for. The organization of the workforce was strictly hierarchical. There was a clear division into teams, which were humorously or proudly given names. On stone blocks used in the construction, graffiti was found that teams called the Friends of Cheops or the Drunkards of Menkaure. Such inscriptions show that the workers were not only anonymous masses, but identified with their task. They were part of a great project carried out in the name of the pharaoh, and thus in the name of the gods. It is likely that there were two large groups of workers. On the one hand, the permanent specialists, i.e. stonemasons, carpenters, architects, and craftsmen, who were permanently employed and ensured quality and precision. On the other hand, the seasonal workers who were called upon to build for a few months during the Nile flood when their fields were flooded and uncultivated. This form of work was a kind of tax liability to the state, but at the same time it was associated with provision and social security. Of course, one must not romanticize the pyramid building. The work was hard, dangerous, and full of deprivation. Many workers died of accidents or exhaustion, and the physical strain must have been enormous. But the idea that these were exploited slave masses is clearly refuted by the archaeological finds. Rather, it shows a picture of people who worked in an organized system that provided for them and in which they saw themselves as part of a divine project. These findings also have consequences for our image of ancient Egypt. They show that the state was able not only to plan buildings of gigantic proportions, but also to take care of the people who built them. The pyramid building was thus a mirror of the economic strength, the social organization, and the religious self-image of society. The long-effective idea of slave labor probably also arose from a need of later cultures to relativize Egyptian greatness. Especially in Judaism and Christianity, the story of the Israelites who worked as slaves in Egypt played a central role. These stories were associated with the pyramids, although there is no historical evidence that the Israelites were involved in its construction. Modern research makes a clear distinction between religious tradition and archaeological facts. Today it is considered certain that the Pyramids of Giza were built by the hands of free, albeit obliged, workers who were rewarded for their efforts with food, shelter, and medical care. They were not nameless victims, but proud participants in a project that connected them to the gods and their king. Chapter 10. Building Techniques and Tools. How the Pyramids were created. Transporting these blocks was one of the biggest logistical challenges. Archaeological finds and experiments show that sleds were used that were pulled across the ground. Recent studies show that the Egyptians moistened the sand in front of the sleds with water to significantly reduce friction. This allowed groups of 20 to 40 workers to move stones weighing tons. Large boats were used for transport across the Nile, which could load several blocks at the same time. Once on the shore, the stones were brought to the construction site via ramp systems. The biggest technical question remains to this day: how were the stones brought up? There are various theories about this. A common assumption is the use of straight ramps that extended from the floor to the height of the pyramid. However, these ramps would have had to have enormous dimensions and would have been almost as big as the pyramid itself. Other researchers suspect spiral ramps that led around the pyramid, or ramps that ran inside the structure. A combination of these methods was probably used, adapted to the respective construction phase. Recent simulations show that it was technically possible to build the pyramids with such ramp systems and the technology of the time. The organization of the workforce was also part of the construction technology. The workers were divided into teams that took on specific tasks: cutting, transporting, smoothing, and setting the stones. Each block was numbered and marked to precisely determine its position in the structure. On some blocks, graffiti of the worker teams has even been preserved, with names such as the Friends of Cheops. This shows that not only technical precision, but also clear documentation was part of the construction process. The completion of a pyramid probably took 20 to 30 years. Construction had to begin at the beginning of a reign, as the work could take the entire life cycle of a pharaoh. Construction managers, architects, and priests had to work closely together. Architects and engineers took care of the technical implementation, while priests supervised the ritual significance of the orientation and design. The construction of the pyramid was thus not only a technical, but also a religious project, in which every decision was interpreted in cosmic dimensions. The Pyramids of Giza are thus not only monuments of religion and power, but also testimonies to the human ability to make the impossible possible. Every block, every aisle, every line is the result of craftsmanship and engineering. The fact that these structures are still standing after thousands of years proves that the techniques of the Egyptians not only worked, but also achieved a durability that is unparalleled to this day. In retrospect, it becomes clear that the building techniques and tools of the Egyptians may seem simple to us today, but they were precisely tailored to their time and their means. They reveal the creativity and adaptability of a culture that achieved great things with simple means, so great that it still goes beyond the imagination. Chapter 11. The Inner Structure, Burial Chambers and Corridors. The king's chamber, deep in the heart of the pyramid, is the central element. It is built entirely of granite, which gives it an almost indestructible stability. It contains a large, empty sarcophagus made of rose granite, which was probably intended to house the body of Khufu. Above the chamber are 5 relief chambers that absorb the weight of the stone masses above. Without this construction, the burial chamber would have collapsed long ago. This ingenious technique shows how far the builder's understanding of statics and loads extended. The 2 chambers are connected by the Great Gallery, a corridor more than 8 meters high, over 40 meters long, which is a masterpiece of ancient architecture with its barrel-like vaulted roof. The gallery not only served to connect the chambers, but probably also had ritual significance. Its monumental character gives the impression of an ascent, a journey from the earthly to the heavenly. The Menkaure pyramid also has a comparatively simple structure. A descending corridor leads to several antechambers and finally to the actual burial chamber. It is noteworthy that their chambers were partly built of granite, which shows a particularly high standard of durability. In the 19th century, the sarcophagus of the pharaoh was found here, but it was lost on the way to England. The internal structure was not only functional, but also part of the religious symbolism. The descending corridors, which lead deep into the rock, symbolize the way to the underworld. The ascending passages, on the other hand, stood for the pharaoh's ascent to the stars. The burial chambers were not simply rooms for the corpse, but cosmic centers in which the pharaoh was united with the gods. Every corridor, every shaft was part of an overall concept that understood death as a transition to the eternal. In particular, the so-called ventilation shafts of the Cheops pyramid have posed puzzles. Their tiny dimensions make it impossible for them to have practical functions. Their orientation, however, points to certain stars. One shaft points to the North Star, another to the belt stars of Orion. In the Egyptian faith, Orion was associated with the god Osiris, the ruler of the underworld. This symbolic connection suggests that the shafts served as spiritual ascension routes for the pharaoh's soul. The internal structure also served to protect the corpse. Numerous blocking systems with heavy stone slabs were intended to stop grave robbers. But despite these measures, almost all pyramids were already plundered in ancient times. The sarcophagus of the Pyramid of Cheops is empty, and the burial chambers of Khafre and Menkaure were already robbed when they were discovered. This circumstance shows that even the most sophisticated protective mechanisms did not withstand the greed for treasure. Nevertheless, the interior architecture remains a fascinating testimony to the Egyptian worldview. It combined practical, symbolic, and religious aspects into an overall concept. Every corridor, every chamber, and every shaft had its role in the program of the afterlife. The pyramid was not just a tomb, but a machine that was supposed to catapult the pharaoh into eternity. In retrospect, it can be said that the internal structure of the pyramids is just as impressive as their outer shape. It reveals the interplay of technology and religion, of engineering and cosmology. The corridors, chambers, and shafts were not just architectural elements, but the expression of a worldview that understood death not as an end, but as a transformation. Anyone who enters the narrow corridors of the Great Pyramid of Cheops today is not only entering a building, but a monument to the belief in eternity. When you think of the necropolis of Giza, the 3 great pyramids inevitably appear in your mind's eye. But just as inextricably linked to this place is another monument that has captured the imagination of mankind for thousands of years, the Great Sphinx of Giza. With its lion body and human face, it rises more than 20 meters into the air and stretches majestically into the desert over a length of 73 meters. It is one of the oldest and largest monoliths in the world and embodies the mysterious and at the same time terrifying nature of ancient Egypt like hardly any other building. The Sphinx was probably part of a larger ritual program. It was directly connected to the Valley Temple and the Way of Khafre. Some researchers see it as a symbol of the sun god Re, who was closely associated with royal power. Its east-west orientation could indicate that it welcomed the sunrise and thus embodied the daily rebirth of the sun in accordance with the belief in the afterlife. Over the millennia, The Sphinx has given rise to numerous myths and legends. Even in ancient times, the Greeks puzzled over its meaning and linked it to their own world of legends, especially with the famous Sphinx of Thebes, which confronted travelers with riddles. In the Middle Ages, it was considered a work of magical powers or an oracle. Arab scholars gave it the name Abu ul-Hol, the father of terror, an epithet that underlines its mysterious charisma. However, the Sphinx was not always visible in its full size. Over the centuries, it has been buried again and again by the desert sand. In some cases, only her head protruded from the sand, and it was only through repeated excavations that it was exposed. Even in ancient times, pharaohs such as Thutmose IV tried to free the Sphinx from sand and decay. Between their paws, Thutmose had a stele erected, the so-called dream stele, which tells how the young prince fell asleep in the shadow of the buried Sphinx and received in a dream the divine vision that he would become king if he uncovered the monument. This story illustrates the central role the Sphinx played as a symbol of divine legitimacy in later times. The millennia have taken their toll on the Sphinx. Erosion by wind and sand, but also human intervention, have marked them. Particularly striking is the lack of a nose, which today gives it its iconic, albeit damaged, appearance. For a long time, the rumor persisted that Napoleon had the nose destroyed by cannon shots in the 18th century. But contemporary drawings from the 17th century already show the Sphinx without a nose. It was probably deliberately cut off in the Middle Ages, possibly by religious zealots who wanted to desecrate the pagan symbol. Despite this damage, the Sphinx is still one of the most recognizable landmarks in the world today. Modern restoration measures have tried to stop further decay by stabilizing damaged areas and strengthening the subsoil. Nevertheless, preservation remains a challenge, as the porous limestone is susceptible to weather influences. The Sphinx is not only a monument to the past, but also a symbol of the mysteries of ancient Egypt. To this day, there are numerous theories about their meaning, when they were created, and even the possibility of hidden chambers under their bodies. Some speculate about libraries full of secret knowledge, others about ritual facilities that could still be discovered. Although there is no evidence for such hypotheses so far, the Sphinx remains a magnet for legends and speculation. Anyone standing in front of the Sphinx today sees more than a piece of stone. One looks into a face that has greeted the sunrise for thousands of years, that has seen kings, conquerors, travelers, and explorers. A face that radiates authority and mystery in equal measure. The Sphinx is therefore not only a monument, but a living symbol that preserves the soul of ancient Egypt to this day. The temples at the pyramids also reflected the belief in the afterlife. The Valley Temple served as a place where the pharaoh's body was prepared and ritually cleansed. From there, a processional path led to the mortuary temple at the pyramid, where sacrificial acts took place to serve the king in the afterlife. Priests ensured that the deceased was regularly provided with food, drink, and prayers even after his death. This practice manifested the conviction that life in the afterlife was a continuation of earthly existence, only more divine and eternal. However, the pyramids were not only important to the king, but also had a collective dimension. By participating in the construction, the people symbolically participated in the eternal fate of the pharaoh. The construction itself became a religious act that involved the entire country. Every worker who set a stone helped to strengthen the connection between heaven and earth, between king and god. In this way, the construction of the pyramid became an expression of communal religiosity that went far beyond the person of the ruler. Chapter 14. Myths, Legends, and Ancient Reports. The Pyramids of Giza were already a source of endless fascination in ancient times. Even for their contemporaries, they were more than just tombs. They appeared as monuments that came from another world, as works that exceeded human abilities. No wonder, then, that they were shrouded in myths, legends, and speculations. These stories still shape our image of the pyramids today, sometimes as historical reports, sometimes as a mirror of cultural longings and fears. The first great historian to report on the pyramids was Herodotus, who traveled to Egypt in the 5th century BC. His descriptions still shape the popular idea of pyramid construction today. He wrote that Khufu was a cruel tyrant who forced his people to do forced labor to build his gigantic pyramid. 100,000 men had worked for decades under terrible conditions. But modern archaeology has shown that this portrayal was exaggerated or simply wrong. Herodotus lived 2 millennia after the pyramids were built and relied on stories that had long since become legendary. Nevertheless, his descriptions persisted for centuries and shaped the idea of pyramid construction by slaves. Other ancient authors such as Diodorus of Sicily or Strabo also took up the topic. Diodorus reported in the 1st century BC that the pyramids were built by cruel rulers, whose names were later forgotten in order to punish them for their tyranny. Strabo, on the other hand, was impressed by the precision of the structures and described the secret entrance to the Great Pyramid of Cheops, which he allegedly saw himself. Such reports mix observation with speculation and show how much the pyramids were perceived as enigmas even in antiquity. The belief in treasures inside the pyramids also shaped their perception. Even in ancient times, grave robbers tried to penetrate the buildings in the hope of gold and precious grave goods. In the 9th century, the Caliph al-Ma'mun had the Pyramid of Cheops opened by force. However, no treasures were found. The pyramid had been plundered centuries earlier. Nevertheless, the myth of enormous riches that must have been hidden somewhere in the depths of the pyramids persisted. The medieval Arab chroniclers also contributed to the legends. They saw the pyramids as magical structures that had been erected to protect against the flood. In their eyes, they were treasure houses in which mankind's knowledge of mathematics, astronomy, and medicine was stored so that it would survive a coming catastrophe. These stories reflect the amazement that the pyramids exerted on people who could not explain them. With the arrival of European travelers in modern times, the myths were further fueled. When Napoleon moved to Egypt in 1798, he brought a group of scientists with him to measure and document the monuments. But popular tradition soon said that Napoleon had used the pyramids as military bases or even discovered secret weapons caches inside them. Such legends show how strongly historical events and mythical ideas can flow into each other. As imposing as the Pyramids of Giza appear to this day, they are also witnesses to a long history of robbery, destruction, and renewal. Shortly after their erection, a fate began that many monuments of antiquity shared. They were plundered, damaged, and misused, and yet they survived the millennia. It is precisely this history that makes them not only symbols of the eternal, but also memorials of human greed, carelessness, and at the same time human efforts to preserve it. A particularly well-known example is the Pyramid of Cheops. Its original entrance was carefully hidden, but tomb robbers created their own entrances even in ancient times. When Caliph al-Ma'mun had the pyramid opened in the 9th century AD, his workers found nothing but empty rooms. The hoped-for treasures had long since disappeared. Nevertheless, this opening contributed to the fact that for the first time there was a systematic insight into the interior. In addition to robbery, destruction through conversion also played a major role. In the Middle Ages, rulers began to remove the limestone cladding of the pyramids in order to extract building material for Cairo. The white, smooth plates that once made the pyramid shine were used in mosques, palaces, and fortresses. As a result, the pyramids lost their original appearance and received the stepped surface we see today. In particular, the Pyramid of Cheops was robbed of its cladding in this way, while a small remnant of the Pyramid of Khafre was still preserved at the top. Natural influences also contributed to the destruction. The porous limestone is susceptible to erosion by wind and sand, and the millennia have left clear traces. Sandstorms eroded the surfaces, temperature fluctuations led to cracks, and rain, especially in later centuries when the climate became wetter, took its toll on the rock. In addition, there were earthquakes that shook the structure. Especially in the 14th century, strong earthquakes caused many cladding stones to fall down and further damage the pyramids. But despite all this destruction, the pyramids survived, proof of the ingenious construction of their creators. Their enormous mass made them indestructible, and even if they no longer shine in their original glory, they still look monumental. Their survival shows that they were not only intended as symbols of eternity, but actually come close to this idea. In modern times, a new chapter began, that of conservation and restoration. With the rediscovery by European researchers in the 18th and 19th centuries, there was a growing awareness that the pyramids represent a unique cultural heritage. Archaeologists and engineers began to systematically examine the structures and take measures to stop further decay. In the 20th century, the first large-scale restoration work was carried out. Attempts were made to secure loose stones, stabilize cracks, and consolidate the subsoil. The Sphinx has also been restored several times, adding modern materials to damaged sections. These interventions are not without controversy, as they sometimes distort the original appearance. But without them, the monuments might have been more damaged or even lost long ago. The preservation of the pyramids remains a huge challenge to this day. Millions of tourists visit the site every year, which means additional burdens on the structures. Exhaust fumes from nearby Cairo, humidity, and mechanical stress from visitors endanger stability. Archaeologists and restorers are therefore faced with the difficult task of mastering the balancing act between accessibility and protection. International organizations such as UNESCO have declared the Pyramids of Giza a World Heritage Site and launched programs to ensure their preservation. Modern technologies such as laser scanning, 3D models, and muon tomography now help to closely monitor the condition of the monuments and to initiate timely measures against damage. The question of cultural responsibility also plays a role. The pyramids do not only belong to Egypt, but are part of the World Heritage Site. They remind us that monuments belong not only to the past, but also to the future. Their preservation is a task that concerns all of humanity. In retrospect, it becomes clear that the pyramids have a history of robbery and destruction, but also of preservation and renewal. They were plundered, desecrated, and misused, but they survived everything. Its permanence makes it a symbol of permanence, withstanding even human greed and the violence of nature. At the same time, they remind us that the eternal also needs care if it is to survive. The Pyramids of Giza are not only witnesses of a past high culture, but also witnesses of human history as a whole, with all its light and dark sides. They remind us that culture can be both destroyed and preserved, and that it is our responsibility to protect humanity's heritage for generations to come. Chapter 16. The Pyramids in Antiquity, Admiration by Greeks and Romans. Just a few centuries after their construction, the pyramids lost their original function as burial sites. They had been plundered, their passages broken, and their treasures stolen. But this did not change her fascination. For the Greeks and Romans who came to Egypt centuries later, the pyramids were not relics, but marvels that pointed beyond everyday life and embodied the glory of a lost era. They looked at the monuments with amazement, awe, and sometimes also with a critical eye. The Greeks viewed the pyramids not only as architectural marvels, but also as symbols of human hubris. For them, they embodied the genius of the Egyptians on the one hand, and the cruelty of their rulers on the other. Diodorus of Sicily, another historian, wrote in the 1st century BC that the names of the builders were deliberately erased from the inscriptions in order to punish them for their tyranny. The pyramids therefore appeared to the Greeks as ambivalent monuments, magnificent and admirable, but also memorials of human arrogance. But despite such criticism, the pyramids exerted an enormous attraction on travelers and conquerors. Roman tourists visited them, marveled at their size, and left inscriptions on the stones, an early form of graffiti that has survived to this day. Emperors such as Hadrian are also said to have visited the pyramids to see the monuments with their own eyes. For the Roman upper class, a trip to Egypt was an educational experience, an immersion in a culture that seemed older and more mysterious than their own. For the Greeks and Romans, the pyramids were also a gateway to the past. They embodied an era so old that it could hardly be understood. Many thought they were older than they actually are, and attributed their emergence to mythical kings or even divine powers. This mixture of amazement and incomprehension made the pyramids a mystery for antiquity that still resonates today. In retrospect, it becomes clear that for the Greeks and Romans, the pyramids were reflections of their own worldview. They saw in them genius and extravagance, greatness and hubris, wisdom and tyranny. This ambivalent attitude is what makes her reports so fascinating. For they show that the pyramids were not just stone monuments, but projection surfaces onto which each culture transferred its own values and fears. This ancient admiration still resonates today. If we consider the pyramids to be wonders of the world today, we do so not least in the legacy of the Greeks and Romans, who first elevated them to this rank. Their reports, whether critical or reverent, are part of the cultural memory that makes the pyramids more than just tombs of stone. They are symbols of a human history that is characterized by amazement, admiration, and a desire for interpretation. Chapter 17. Medieval Interpretations. From Magic to Treasure Hunts. Closely linked to these ideas was the belief in hidden treasures. Tomb robbers had already tried to plunder the pyramids in ancient times, but in the Middle Ages these attempts were fueled by fantastic tales. It was said that gold and precious stones were hidden in immeasurable quantities in the pyramids, as well as statues made of pure crystal, magical instruments, and even entire palaces. Stories of courageous treasure hunters trying to penetrate the pyramids circulated throughout the Arab world. In the 9th century, the Caliph al-Ma'mun had a hole punched in the Pyramid of Cheops, a hole that is still visible today. The religious interpretation also led to the pyramids being seen as structures with divine or demonic significance. Some Christians considered them testimonies of pagan arrogance, monuments of a godless pride directed against the Creator. Others saw in them mysterious signs that pointed to the coming end of the world. Arab scholars, on the other hand, linked the pyramids with astrological ideas and saw their shape as an image of the cosmos. It is interesting to note how strongly the medieval interpretations were characterized by fear and reverence. While the Greeks and Romans looked at the pyramids with rational wonder, the Middle Ages often saw them as a supernatural threat or divine mystery. This attitude also explains why many legends associated the pyramids with mischief, curses, or hidden power. They were not only monuments, but also projection surfaces for the fears and longings of an era that sought orientation in the supernatural. Even the first European travelers were overwhelmed by the buildings. They made drawings, reports, and sketches that caused a great stir in Europe after their return. The pyramids were considered exotic symbols of a distant, ancient culture and became popular motifs in art, literature, and architecture. At a time when discoveries and scientific curiosity shaped the world, they embodied the mysterious and at the same time explainable that fascinated the modern era so much. A decisive moment was Napoleon's Egyptian campaign of 1798 to 1801, when Napoleon brought not only soldiers but also a large team of scientists, engineers, and artists to Egypt. These savants were tasked with systematically researching and documenting the country. They measured the pyramids, drew plans, and made detailed illustrations. Their results were later published in the monumental work Description de l'Egypte, which appeared in several volumes and amazed the whole of Europe. The pyramids thus became known not only as symbols of antiquity, but also as objects of scientific investigation. In the 19th century, a veritable wave of Egyptomania began. After the publication of the Description de l'Egypte, Egypt became a place of longing for European travelers. Writers, painters, and adventurers flocked to the country to see the monuments. In Europe, Egyptian-style gardens, furniture, and buildings emerged, and the pyramids became a symbol of exoticism and ancient wisdom. At the same time, modern archaeology developed. Researchers such as Giovanni Battista Caviglia, Howard Vyse, or Auguste Mariette began to systematically examine the pyramids. Vyse even blasted passages into the pyramid of Khufu with gunpowder to discover new chambers. He found inscriptions in the relief chambers above the king's chamber that contained the name Cheops, and thus proved once and for all that the pyramid had indeed been built under his rule. This discovery refuted many earlier speculations and laid the foundation for scientific attribution. But despite such dark sides, the rediscovery was a milestone. It led to a systematic examination of the pyramids and to the emergence of Egyptology as a science. With the decipherment of hieroglyphics by Jean-François Champollion in 1822, a new approach to culture opened up, and the pyramids could now be understood not only by external observation, but also by written sources. The fascination that the pyramids triggered during this time was enormous. They became the symbol of a civilization that was older and more mysterious than Greco-Roman antiquity, which until then had been considered the origin of Western culture. They questioned Europe's view of history and opened up a view of an even older past that was just as rich and important. The rediscovery by European researchers was therefore more than an archaeological event. It marked a turning point in the relationship between Europe and Egypt. The pyramids became symbols of a global cultural heritage, but also projection surfaces of colonial power. Today, these ambivalent aspects are viewed critically. On the one hand, enthusiasm and scientific progress, and on the other hand, exploitation and appropriation. The rediscovery of the pyramids shows how man's relationship to the past has changed. Myths became measurements, legends became science, and amazement became knowledge. But the mystery that surrounds the pyramids remained. Perhaps it is precisely this mixture of explained knowledge and unexplained mystery that keeps her fascination unbroken for centuries. Chapter 19: Modern Archaeology and Secrets of the Pyramids. Since their creation, the Pyramids of Giza have been the subject of speculation, admiration, and research. While the people of antiquity and the Middle Ages mainly wrapped the monuments in the veil of myths and legends, a scientific debate began in modern times with the European expeditions. But it was not until modern archaeology of the 20th and 21st centuries that a profound understanding opened up, and at the same time new mysteries. Because the more closely we examine the pyramids, the more they reveal their complexity to us. Modern archaeology relied on systematic excavations and precise surveys. Especially in the 20th century, large-scale projects were created that examined not only individual pyramids, but also the entire area around the necropolis of Giza. The focus was on the worker settlements, which showed for the first time how the construction was actually organized. Bakeries, slaughterhouses, workshops, and even infirmaries were discovered here, a clear indication that the workers were not slaves, but well-supplied partners in a gigantic project. This realization corrected centuries-old ideas and made the pyramids a testimony to collective achievement. Another focus of modern research is on construction technology. Numerous experiments were carried out to find out how the Egyptians were able to move the stones, which weighed tons. Archaeologists rebuilt ramps, pulled stones onto sleds, and tested wetting sand with water. These experiments showed that the pyramids could actually be built with the means and techniques of the time, without magic, without supernatural help. Nevertheless, the question of the exact method remains open to this day, as there are no clear written sources. Modern technology brought new possibilities for exploration. With the help of laser scanners and 3D models, the pyramids could be measured with millimeter precision. It turned out that their alignment with the cardinal directions is extremely precise. The deviation from the north-south axis of the Great Pyramid of Khufu is only a few arc-minutes. This accuracy suggests a deep astronomical knowledge that was implemented in architecture. The results of muon tomography, a technique that uses cosmic rays to make hidden cavities visible, are particularly spectacular. In 2017, researchers used this method to discover a large, previously unknown cavity above the Great Gallery in the Great Pyramid of Khufu. Its function is still unclear today. Some suspect a relieving room, similar to the well-known chambers above the King's Chamber. Others speculate about a previously undiscovered passage or a symbolic element. This discovery shows that the pyramids still hold secrets that research has yet to bring to light. The so-called ventilation shafts also continue to cause discussion. They run narrow and steep from the chambers into the open air and are aligned with certain stars. For archaeologists, they are evidence of the cosmic dimension of pyramid construction. They connected the deceased king to the stars, especially Orion and Sirius, who were closely associated with Osiris and Isis, the gods of the afterlife. For others, there remain mysterious elements whose exact function is still a mystery. However, modern archaeology goes beyond technology. She asks about the social and cultural backgrounds. Why did a society invest so much energy in the construction of such monuments? What role did the pyramid construction play in the identity of the Old Kingdom? The answers lie in the interplay of religion, power, and society. Pharaoh was not just a king, but a god on earth whose tomb was of universal importance. The pyramids are therefore an expression of a worldview in which politics, religion, and the cosmos were inseparably linked. But despite all the progress, much remains in the dark. It is still unclear why pyramids of such size were built in the 4th dynasty and why later rulers chose smaller or different shapes. The question of whether there are still hidden chambers in the pyramids is also unresolved. Some researchers hope for further discoveries with the help of new technologies. Others warn against exaggerated expectations. Parallel to serious research, the pyramids have also inspired countless speculations and pseudoscientific theories in the modern era. Some see them as works of a vanished high culture or even of aliens. Others claim that the pyramids are energy stores or secret messages. These ideas are scientifically unfounded, but they show how strongly the buildings still stimulate the imagination. The fact that, despite all the research, we cannot answer all the questions leaves room for myths that make the pyramids a global symbol of mystery to this day. At the same time, modern archaeology is also confronted with ethical questions. Many finds from the 19th century are in European museums and are now viewed critically in the context of colonial appropriation. At the same time, the pyramids are under pressure from mass tourism and environmental pollution. Archaeologists and restorers must therefore not only research, but also protect, a task that requires global cooperation. In retrospect, it becomes clear that modern archaeology has revolutionized our understanding of the pyramids. She has transformed them from mysterious myths into complex, explainable monuments of an early high culture, and at the same time retained their fascination. Because the more we learn about them, the more we realize how many questions remain unanswered. They are not only testimonies of the past, but also challenges for the present, bridges between science and wonder. Today, more than ever, the Pyramids of Giza embody a paradox. They are the best-studied monuments in the world, and at the same time the most mysterious. Its stones have been measured, its structures explored, its symbolism analyzed. And yet the feeling remains that they are more than we can comprehend. Perhaps this is precisely where their power lies, that they keep making us ask new questions, and to recognize the essence of humanity in amazement at the unknown. Today, the Pyramids of Giza are more than monuments of a bygone era. They are symbols of human history, sites of tourism, objects of intensive research, and at the same time part of a lively Egyptian present. Anyone who visits it enters not only an archaeological site, but a world in which past and present overlap in a unique way. Every year, millions of visitors from all over the world flock to Giza. For many, it is a lifelong dream to see the pyramids with their own eyes, to touch the huge masses of stone or to let their gaze wander to the Sphinx. Tourism is an important source of income for Egypt, creating jobs and strengthening the local economy. At the same time, it brings enormous challenges. Mass tourism is putting a strain on the buildings, and the steady increase in visitors is leading to erosion, wear and tear, and damage. The narrow corridors inside the Pyramid of Cheops in particular suffer from the moisture caused by the air we breathe. Nevertheless, its effect remains unbroken. Anyone standing in front of the pyramids today feels a mixture of amazement, awe, and humility. The sheer size of the structures, the precision of their lines, and their majestic presence in the desert seem timeless. They connect us to a distant past and at the same time make us think about our own transience. They remind us that humans were able to create great things thousands of years ago, and that the search for immortality is a universal human need.